Wisdom Shorts.
Silence can never be misquoted. Calvin Coolidge. In 1924, President Calvin Coolidge sat in the White House cabinet room, facing the most heated political crisis of his presidency. His advisors surrounded the table, their voices rising in panic. "Mr. President," shouted his Treasury Secretary, "the press is demanding answers about the Teapot Dome scandal. You must respond." Coolidge looked around the room at the faces of desperation. Every newspaper in America was calling for his statement, his explanation, his defense. His chief of staff slammed his fist on the table. "Sir, your silence is being interpreted as guilt. You must speak now." Coolidge remained motionless in his chair, his hands folded calmly on the table. Without a word, Coolidge listened as his advisors grew more frantic. His staff, full of anxiety, paced around the room. "The opposition is gaining ground every day you stay silent," cried his press secretary. "They're writing your political obituary." The room erupted in chaos as advisors shouted over each other, demanding action, demanding words, demanding anything. Suddenly, and without warning, Coolidge stood up and walked to the window, turning his back on the entire room. His advisors fell silent, stunned by his apparent indifference to their crisis. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. For a full minute, Coolidge said nothing, while his entire political future hung in the balance. Finally, his chief of staff whispered desperately, "Mr. President, please, what should we tell the press?" Coolidge turned slowly from the window, his face showing the calm that would define his presidency. "Tell me," he said quietly, "what happens to a man's words when he speaks in anger?" They can be used against him," his advisor replied, confused. Coolidge nodded with that legendary composure. "When you understand that silence cannot be misquoted," he declared, "when you realize that the man who speaks least controls the conversation most, then you discover that sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all." Coolidge never made a public statement about the scandal. His opponents exhausted themselves attacking his silence. 6 months later, the real culprits were exposed and Coolidge emerged completely vindicated. True power often lies not in what we say, but in what we choose not to say.